Today on the Pro-Life Podcast, it's a historical moment and fake news is rampant. We have much to discuss. Grab your coffee, let's get started. Happy Tuesday, Pro-Life family!
You got one of these?
Oh.
Wait, how do you do it? Got it!
I don't make blowing noises. I'm a little disappointed.
No, that's okay.
We
We'll
spared
add it in
expense.
The $1.97.
If you don't know what we're celebrating right now, you have lived under a rock for the last few days.
At least not on social media.
Correct.
Which is not a super happy place right now. It's both extremes. Mm-hmm. It's both extremes.
It should be, because it should be both extremes, because this is light and darkness. It is life and death, and there is no middle ground.
Oh my gosh, I'm so over the moon.
100%.
But at the same time, so sad by how many people are crazy.
Yeah.
And stupid. But I'm so happy. I'm so happy.
We knew there would be a rift. It's just we didn't know how big or deep it was until we got here.
Yeah.
So we've all had very emotional weekends with conversations with people we didn't expect to have conversations with.
Angry family members.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's talk about what they're angry about.
Well,
So you've got a nice little stack of legal themes with lots of highlights and notes and such.
it's just the most fun thing in the world.
Can we just say it again?
Can we just do it one more time?
Yes.
Roe v. Wade.
All right, here we are celebrating, throwing confetti in the air for those of you listening onto the podcast. Ready?
1,
2, 3. Woo!
So awesome.
We'll add
Roe v. Wade is dead.
We'll maybe add some digital confetti or something to make that a little more impressive.
Ding
Pop,
dong,
pop.
the witch is dead.
Yeah. So to get back on track, what we're talking about is on Friday, of course, the opinion from the United States Supreme Court came down in the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization out of Mississippi, where the Supreme Court, after 50 years, said, Roe v. Wade was wrong.
Yep.
There is no constitutional right to abortion. That court just made it up, which is true. This is not new. This has been the legal reasoning behind the lack thereof, legal analysis in Roe v. Wade has since it was handed down has been the subject of scholars, legal academics, lower court justices, and all across the country, even in pro-choice liberal circles, because it was just literally that bad. And
They made it up.
They did.
They faked a constitutional right.
They did.
100% made up. It's amazing.
And the majority, Justice Alito, the majority opinion just takes them to task about it. One of the reasons is saying, the history of the nation did not allow for abortion on demand, like the 1973 court had to assume in order to reach their conclusion.
It either has to be in the text of the Constitution or deeply rooted in our nation's history, that it was just assumed that abortion was a right for so long until somebody actually put it on paper.
At the drafting of the Constitution, so deeply rooted in our nation's history at the time the Constitution was written that it is a right within.
Basically, a part of natural law, and it's clearly not a part of natural law.
Nope.
Or the English common law tradition, which it was not. So
in 1973, it was very clear they just made this up. It was more like Roe v. Wade was a bill that legislators would write and pass, but that's not the job of the court.
Well, that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Correct. They spent several pages, the justices did, on that point, that the court looked more like a legislative judicial body than a judicial body interpreting the Constitution. And so what this means, this is one of the things that this is what the pro-life movement has had to be fighting for and focused on for the last 40 years, because that was the first target. That was the first obstacle, the first stumbling block is Roe v. Wade and this fake constitutional right to an abortion that we had to get over in order for us to actually do the real work of saving babies, and that's where we are. So we have that big obstacle out from us now. One of the, the holding. So the holding is what us lawyers look back to see what was the point of the case and what law did the case make. And so this is my favorite. It says, first, the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Roe and Casey are overruled, and the authority to regulate abortion is returned to the people and their elected representatives.
I think that needs more confetti.
We actually had fireworks at my house on Friday night, and it was grand. Probably kept the neighbors up a little bit too late. It was wonderful.
Not that late.
Yeah, it was great.
Anyways.
And we talked about the leak on some of our previous podcasts about the leak of the draft opinion, and very few things changed from that opinion. And the only they respond, justices, when they write, they are writing a lot to each other. They are responding, and you've got the majority opinion, which is what rules, okay? Then you have concurrences that mean I agree in some of what the majority says, or I agree in the judgment, in the ruling, the ultimate result, but I get there in a different way, which is what Chief Justice John Roberts did. In this case, he concurred that the Mississippi law at 15 weeks banning abortion should be upheld, but for a different reason. He did not like completely overruling Roe. He wanted to take this really milquetoast, let's adopt a new test so we could argue about it for the next 50 years, which the justices, the majority opinion, clapped back at Justice John Roberts and said, we're not doing that.
It was brutal.
It was great. It was great. I'd have to see where I could might be able to find something in there.
John Roberts' argument basically was like, well, because Roe is precedent, just because it's been around, I really don't like this situation. I really don't like having to choose a side here. So can we just pick a middle route? And luckily, the conservative justices did not buy any of that. The liberal justices did not buy any of that. So Roberts is just here by himself trying to be like, guys, can't we all just get along?
Yeah. And so I found that the justices, I just love their brutal honesty in responding to Chief Justice John Roberts. They said, in sum, the concurrence's quest for a middle way could only put off the day when we would be forced to confront the question that we now decide. The turmoil wrought by Roe and Casey would be prolonged. It is far better for this court and the country to face up to the real issue without further delay.
Boom.
No more kicking the can down the road.
That's wonderful.
Okay? And they just did that throughout. And one of the interesting, they spent a lot of time in the opinion talking about, before 1973, what really was the state of abortion laws in the country, state by state? Something that is an analysis the 1973 court should have done. They didn't do that, and that court has been criticized for not engaging in that sort of analysis through there. Exactly. But it said, until the latter part of the 20th century, there was no support in American law for a constitutional right to obtain an abortion. No state constitutional provision had recognized such a right. And until a few years before Roe was handed down, no federal or state court had recognized such a right. The earliest article proposing a constitutional right to abortion that has come to our attention was published only a few years before Roe. Not even a law that somebody or a state constitution rewritten. So, it's great.
So this idea that abortion is deeply rooted in our nation's history, and that's why Roe was written and why it should have stayed, they say, is because abortion, has just had such a place in our nation's history. But that wasn't true until right before Roe. So this was very clearly a political move early on. Yeah. And for the people who believe what Roberts says of oh, well, maybe there should be some reasonable exception, that's for your state legislature to decide right now. And we don't believe that there's any ethical reason for elective abortion like that. But for the people who think oh, well, the Supreme Court gets to decide that. No, it doesn't. That's for the Supreme Court says that's not our job to decide. That's you people can argue that out.
Yeah. Before 1973, before Roe, every state in the Union had a statute criminalizing abortion. Every state.
That's fantastic.
Until 1973. At some point in time, they did. So
let's get back there.
Well, and this is a huge win for the constitutionalists.
Yeah.
It's a big step against bench legislation, and I love that too. But that's
Yeah, 'cause I've
a
heard-
tangent for another day, maybe. But
Well, I don't know. I love tangents. I've had a few people mention that they wish the Supreme Court had gone further with Dobbs and say, make abortion illegal in every state. And as a Christian, we all agree that abortion is a grave evil and should be abolished. But as a constitutionalist, I wonder, how would you respond to that?
I wanted to. I was about to bring that up.
Yeah.
So great point. So first of all, neither side argued that at the Supreme Court. Okay. So they said either Roe v. Wade had to be overturned or had to. The only options were wholesale overruling or wholesale saying it was right on. We're going to keep going down that road.
And
but
the
they
court-
didn't argue the federal.
The court can't answer questions that you don't ask it.
Correct.
So if the state doesn't argue, like, we need this or this can be the solution, the court doesn't answer that question. And it can only answer questions that are in front of it,
Right.
which is, a good thing.
And one of the significant points about this opinion that I actually haven't talked about yet, I think the court, at least this majority, is signaling that they kind of feel that way, that there's another question to be asked, because they spend a lot of time talking about, and they always do it in quotes, potential life. It's like, Casey called it potential life, and they're talking about how this interest is so much different and has so much more of a moral connotation to it than your right to marry and all just other things that you see are kind of hot button items of when we're talking about liberty, but that there is something specifically different about abortion and life inside of a mom. And
Are you saying that there could be another case one day
I think
that
so.
would protect life from the Supreme Court? Because
I
right
think
now,
well, I mean, they
it
have
just sent it back to the states.
Correct. I mean, there has to, there's going to be, right, Congress could pass a law, when we have a pro-life majority, Congress could pass a law and we, constitutional amendment, excuse me, because you'd have to change the constitutional amendment, that's down the road, but, they're recognizing that there are a lot more at stake.
Yeah.
In regards to.
Gosh, wouldn't that
what's
be
going
amazing? It's like we have to pause and celebrate what's happened.
Right. Yeah.
And yet recognize what still needs to happen. It didn't really occur to me at this moment in time that the United States could potentially ban abortion entirely yet. I guess I was just looking toward, step 1, but maybe that's step 4 or 5.
Right.
I mean, that's what we need. That would redeem the entire United States. I mean, we were founded on Christian morality, and wouldn't that just be so incredibly redemptive if the United States were able to reach that point? Yeah, where it's entirely banned.
But history tells us constitutional amendments are not set in stone.
Yeah, yeah. And governments fail, and constitutions fail, and that's why Christ is king.
Yes.
It's also hard to pass a constitutional amendment, and the founders designed it that way, because this isn't like some willy-nilly document that can just like bend to your will. It has to be.
It's not a living, breathing thing that we just change however we feel today?
Contrary to popular belief. Yeah, so the Constitution is supposed to be difficult to amend. That means we're going to have a lot of cultural work to do. That means that there's still a lot of people who believe that that abortion is okay. They don't understand that what's at stake is a human life. And so we have to do a lot of education on that front to get people to realize, yes, this is a living being who has their own interest in the right to life. And therefore, we need to move the ball that way. So that way it's not just, it's returned back to the states and we're done. We're not done. We need to make sure that abortion is illegal everywhere. We have to start that here in our own state and in our own homes and communities. And we have to start that in these other states where there's going to be these fights of when to allow abortion, when not. And keep pushing the ball forward until every child is protected.
Amen. Preach, Kim. Woohoo! Woohoo! I wish it whistled.
I know.
So one of the things,
add it in post.
One of the things that you'll see kind of on the pro-abortion side is, the baby's not even viable, and women need to have the ability to abort, pre-viability. And pre-viability is what was at issue, issue in the Mississippi case, because the Casey court had said, well, you can't really ban pre-viability abortions. That's That's such just a random line in the sand.
Very
and
arbitrary.
Thank you, arbitrary. And the Dobbs court said that. They said, okay, but viability changes all the time. And it is heavily dependent on other factors, such as the argument is that viability has changed over time and is heavily dependent on factors such as medical advances and the availability of quality medical care that have nothing to do with the characteristics of a fetus. Later on in the opinion, they talk about, if you're in a metropolitan area with access to world-class health services, then what is viable for a baby born there is going to be different than someone in a
West Texas.
If you're in Odessa,
yep,
it's going to be
different medical resources than you have in downtown Houston.
Right. And that was just a crazy way to draw a line and say, okay, a baby is protected here, but not after that. Not here, but not before that point.
The terrible thing with viability, and we've said it many times, I think, on this podcast, that viability, which is when the baby can survive outside the womb, if that's what determines your humanity, that's saying that something outside determines your intrinsic value, not something inside within yourself that has always been there and will always be there, your human dignity given to us by God.
Yeah. It also allows a really slippery slope for post-birth, because if a baby isn't able to survive on its own, well, neither can a newborn infant, neither can a 1-year-old, neither really can a 2-year-old, and so there's so much.
Students cannot.
Yeah, some teenagers really can't survive on their own. So
the Dobbs court said that. They said,
really?
Yes, they did. They said, where does this abortion logic get us? This is, what about the newborn infant? What about the toddler or the person who has complex medical needs?
They
were
talking
talking
with special needs well into their life is going to have so much more difficulty.
Yeah, I think that was. I think they were They were arguing back on the dissent from from the liberal justices about their logic about it. And that's what we as the pro-life community have been saying for years. That's how we're seeing physician-assisted suicide, how we're seeing euthanasia, brain death. I mean, all the 10-day law, because that same ethic. If you're not starting out by thinking, okay, well, a baby in the womb is a human being and worthy of protection because they're human. And if you start putting qualifiers, we've politicized the abortion issue so much that if you start putting qualifiers inside the womb, why on earth would you not do that in any other context?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. said something to the effect of, if you devalue human life anywhere, you devalue human life everywhere. You can't pick and choose, this person gets life because of these characteristics, because other people have those same characteristics to different degrees.
Yeah. It's called discrimination.
Yes. Shock.
Oh, my goodness. Sure. Well, I just keep marveling at how strong the justices have been in these last few months since the week. And, I mean, there are still people outside their houses protesting. And, gosh, I'm so amazed. I would just like to shake their hands. Thank you. And what was you said this morning about even some of their other conservative rulings that have been coming out? You're like, I want to make a meme of them in Avengers costumes. Like, they're here to save the United States.
I mean, I know that this podcast isn't about all those other issues, but I'm just saying that the past week and a half, the court has been, that the new majority is saying, we are here for this time and we're going to do what's in front of us and do the right thing. And that's such a relief because
praise the Lord.
You never, you should do all the good you can in all the places you can, all the times that you can. I think that was John Wesley. My Methodism is coming out a little bit.
There you go.
But for one thing that always stuck with me, Matt Rinaldi, he's the Texas GOP chair now, but he was a fighter from day one when he was in the Texas House. And I have always strived because he said something to me when he was beaten he was beaten in a November race by a Democrat, lost a seat. And he said, it was either during the campaign or maybe right. And he said, I have no regrets because I made a difference. I did what I wanted to do with the time I was there. And he from day one, he was just out and vocal and never of this, well, I got to do this so that I get this chairmanship and I can have more influence down the way. You don't know if you have down the line. You don't know. All you know is you have the opportunity that's in front of you. And I feel like the justices have taken that and kudos to them.
Praise the Lord. And also just, since May, since the leak, we have been praying and we've invited you to pray that the justices would remain strong, that they weren't going to back down from this opinion. And there's really not much difference between the leaked draft from May to this right here. There's a little bit more added, but there's not anything. They didn't water it down. Nobody backed off and decided, oh, you know, like, I don't really like the protesters at my house, so I'm going to go cave. They didn't do that. And that's a miracle in itself. I also have a list of people to thank that I was thinking about this weekend. This is our sarcastic list, just to get your hopes up here.
Oh, dear.
So first, I want to thank Jackson Women's Health Organization Abortion Clinic, because if they would have just left this Mississippi law alone, we wouldn't have had the case to begin with. If there's like thunder going on outside.
Yeah, it's a crazy storm outside.
I don't know if you can hear it, but yeah, that's thunder. Okay, anyway, so we're thanking the Jackson Women's Health Organization for starting this case, for starting this lawsuit. They fumbled it and ended up overturning Roe v. Wade. Likewise, I want to thank the Center for Reproductive Rights for arguing that there should be no middle ground.
Yeah.
Either
We agree.
keep Roe and Casey or you overturn them entirely. We agree. And because of that, they overturned Roe entirely. Third, I want to thank Hillary Clinton for forgetting Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin in the 2016 election and gave that election to Trump. And lastly, Harry Reid and Senate Democrats from 2013 for nuking the filibuster to greenlight all the Obama nominees that they wanted, not realizing that the weapon that they tried to forge against us ended up being used against them whenever we could push the 3 Supreme Court nominees through with a bare majority rather than like the 60 vote threshold that you would normally need. The Senate Democrats are the ones who wrecked that precedent, therefore saying like, okay, well, we can just get our way with the bare majority instead of trying to work across the aisle. And
they shot themselves in the foot.
They did, and it was beautiful. So thank you to all of these Democrats. You handed us this victory.
Good job. Appreciate it.
Confetti for you too.
Woo! This might just be me being petty, but I think that there's
Maybe a
a
little.
degree of sweetness whenever it's not just that you won because you worked hard and had the better playbook, and we did. Democrats played a hand in that, and I think that makes this so much sweeter.
Yeah. It's really nice when your enemy happens to be fairly stupid.
Yes.
Also, you know, I keep thinking about Trump. Like, so many people were divided. They have divided opinions about him. He's a hard man to like. But God used him as a tool in this movement for good. And that is amazing. I mean, as much as people either love him or hate him, I don't think anyone should be idolized like that. No human being should be loved or hated that much. It's just, you know, we are all supposed to be tools for God. And he was. And that is amazing. And I'm so glad that he did the right thing. Whether he did it accidentally or on purpose, it's a little hard to say. But God used him.
He made the right call by just saying, you know, whatever the Federalist Society, just kind of outsourced all of those appointees and saying, I trust your judgment. I trust the people who are around me to make these recommendations. And I think with a lot of other presidents, we would have had somebody who was afraid of a fight, who would have been like, I don't really want to push Judge Kavanaugh. I don't want to push Amy Coney Barrett. That's going to be too controversial. And he wasn't afraid of the fight. And so that's going to be his legacy. This Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade is his legacy. And everyone who is pro-life needs to be thankful for that.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we have some other information that we have to get to real quick. And then we're going to talk what's not in this document. So after these next announcements.
Save the date for Boots on the Ground. It's an awesome pro-life conference coming up January 28th and 29th. Come to Austin, Texas with us to march to the Capitol to celebrate the end of Roe v. Wade, to commemorate Roe v. Wade, and to learn from expert pro-life speakers on how to keep Texas pro-life forever. Come to Austin with us and hear from Ryan Baumberger, our keynote speaker who shares his personal story, and so much more. Book your tickets today, bootsonthegroundtx.com. See you in January.
The Supreme Court just overturned Roe v. Wade. This is a historic moment. Now we have a bold, groundbreaking agenda for the next steps. First, we have to enforce our laws and make sure liberal district attorneys don't give abortionists a free pass. Second, we need to expand the life-saving alternatives to abortion program. And third, we need to save hospital patients. Do you believe in this vision? Go to texasrighttolife.com/stand to donate now and save lives.
Welcome back. We've turned the power back on. There's been some issues since we left. But hey, the recording of the first part of the episode survived. Thank God we didn't have to start all over again. Okay.
The devil doesn't like this episode.
You know, doesn't like us much these days. So we want to talk about, we've talked about what happened in the ruling, what the opinions were, but we also want to talk about, there's a lot of misconceptions about what just happened.
Is there?
The internet is throwing wild fake news around.
Right.
I'm told they banned interracial marriage and everything now too. Is that?
That is not accurate.
What?
That is not accurate. And so one of the important things, and I'm not sure we addressed this well, we don't want to assume, but the opinion just says, hey, states, you get to decide for yourselves now. Right. We don't have any overarching federal rule that you have to fit within the parameters of. What works in Texas works in Texas. What works in California works in California.
Yep.
And those two places could be more different right now.
Yeah, a lot of people think that abortion was just banned all over the United States, and that's not true.
Right. No. The liberals in the liberal cities in the liberal states are like burning their own towns down, and it's like,
abortion's still legal where you live.
Yes.
Sadly.
Unfortunately.
Like, we don't like that, but it's just weirdly ironic to me that they're so upset in New York about
something that is
Dobbs.
legal there.
I'm like, it's still legal up to 9 months in New York.
Right.
Why are you so upset?
Yeah. Okay. I think it's because they misunderstand. The Supreme Court is not a legislative body. This doesn't mean that they're not going to get... I was watching a clip of one of my favorite people, Whoopi Goldberg. She just has such a firm grasp on reality. I love watching her and listening to her speak. So Whoopi Goldberg, I think she's wrong in this instance of she thinks that basically
Whoopi
the Supreme...
is wrong?
Yes, I know. So it's this idea, basically, this underlying misconception that the Supreme Court just gets to pick what to uphold and strike down. Like if it sees a law somewhere over here, it gets to decide, I'm going to go strike down that law and that law and that one. The Supreme Court doesn't do that.
Like whack-a-mole.
Yes, you have to have a vehicle to get there. There has to be a lawsuit early on at a lower federal court that makes its way up to the Supreme Court, and there are very limited instances where the Supreme Court will actually take up a case. It doesn't just get to like point out like this is what we're going to do and this is what we're going to do. That's not how any of this works.
Yeah. So it's been rampant across social media in the decision, after the decision, that all of these instances of tragic situations of when a pregnancy, a baby does not make it full term, that now care in these situations for both baby and mom are somehow outlawed and illegal. And so that's not true. So we're going to address a couple of those.
So let's start with the misconception of ectopic pregnancy.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it requires an abortion, you guys, and now that's illegal and women are going to die.
I know, it's so sad. A lot of people think that you have to have an abortion for an ectopic pregnancy. And actually, there's a post going around virally on the internet right now that someone literally said abortion is the treatment for ectopic pregnancy.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it's not. Even Planned Parenthood says it's not. Like, I actually have a screenshot from Planned Parenthood's website that says how to treat an ectopic pregnancy. And it literally says abortion is not the solution to an ectopic pregnancy. And the way that they treat it is with methotrexate. And so an abortion pill, it's actually 2 pills, misoprostol and mifepristone. They don't work for an ectopic pregnancy. And so you have to take a totally different drug, methotrexate, and or have surgery, a laparoscopic surgery where they make a really tiny incision. And usually by that point, the fallopian tube is so damaged if the ectopic pregnancy happens in a fallopian tube. Ectopic literally means outside in probably Greek or Latin, probably Greek. I would have to fact check that one. But it means outside. And so outside the uterus. So usually an ectopic pregnancy might happen in a fallopian tube because the baby just didn't travel down correctly. Like something's wrong with the pregnancy. And so the baby didn't implant in the right place. And so it's really dangerous for mom and baby. The ectopic pregnancy can rupture and the baby will definitely die, and the mother could die. It's extremely dangerous. And so the pro-choicers are correct in their concern, but they misunderstand the solution, and they might just be absorbing a lie from the media, or just like a lay person's talking point that really doesn't understand science at all, or medical care. It's like, if you ask any doctor, they're going to tell you, like, yeah, it requires surgery or methotrexate. Abortion doesn't work.
Yeah. So I mean, here the way that pregnancies end when babies pass away naturally for some reason, that it's not just birth and abortion. There are other things that happen. Like, there are other pregnancy outcomes that that seems like the pro-choice crowd or the pro-abortion crowd, they want folks to think that all of everything other than the birth of a healthy baby is an abortion. And that's not true. So first of all, you've got the medical definitions of what an abortion is that are not necessarily the same as what we define as elective abortion in state laws across the state.
Yeah. And I mean, even the medical industry, or my medical friends don't like the word industry. The medical field, they don't talk about abortion in terms of ectopic pregnancy. They talk about medical treatment, because that's what it is. It's not actually an abortion. It's not a termination of pregnancy in the same way at all. It is, and sadly, a life is still lost. And so some pro-choice people would say, they would argue, well, it's the same thing. What, you're just calling it by a different name. And no, it's actually totally different medication and totally different process. And the intent is not to kill. Yeah. And sometimes there is actually a strong effort to be able to save the child, to like laparoscopically remove the child. Laparoscopic surgeries, when they use a small little camera internally, and to try to reimplant the child. So far, I haven't heard of any success in doing so, but
the important thing is that they are trying. Like, medicine is not going to overcome this barrier of ectopic pregnancy if we don't try to save both lives. If we just accept abortion as the answer, then we're not going to actually get to the root of the problem in trying to save both lives.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, people are just so upset because they think that we're going to leave women to die when they have these really dangerous pregnancies. And first of all, that's absurd. We would never do that. We're going to do everything we can to save one or both lives. And in an ectopic pregnancy, it's almost always the case that you can only save the mother. And so what you have to do is remove the damaged fallopian tube. And sadly, the child is still inside it. Mm-hmm. The child may have already passed on, or maybe they haven't, but they have to remove the damaged fallopian tube because it's burst. It's usually beyond repair.
In Texas, in our state laws, is about Chapter 245 of the Texas Health and Safety Code, where we define specifically what an elective abortion is. The statute, the law actually says treatment for an ectopic pregnancy is not an abortion.
Right. Yeah. And it just matches the medical field, too. It's not like, because sometimes legal definitions and medical definitions don't line up.
Correct.
But in this case, our legislative team consulted with doctors. Who'd have thunk? Pro-lifers consult with doctors. But I mean, there's actually some really great legislators in the Texas Capitol who are physicians. There's even a couple of OB-GYNs. And so they and many other pro-life doctors are the ones that we're consulting with to write this language in a way that a healthcare professional would understand or relate to.
Yeah. So let's talk about miscarriages.
Yeah. I think that there's this big idea that, because miscarriage is often called spontaneous abortion, that means you're going to start criminalizing miscarriages because they use the same word.
Who calls it spontaneous abortion?
It's like a medical...
That is the medical definition of a miscarriage, spontaneous abortion. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, so it can be very confusing for someone who is not informed about the medical field at all.
Yeah. Miscarriages is such a tragic loss. And I think that even our pro-choice friends, everybody recognizes that miscarriage is a tragedy for that woman, for that baby, and that family, because there's a loss of life.
Or they view, even as if they say a potential life, the loss of potential life, they recognize that it's a tragedy.
Right. Yeah. And so I invite you, if your heart is broken and you think it's going to be wrong for criminalizing miscarriage, if you think it's wrong and a tragedy for that woman who's already suffering, why is she suffering? Think about that. It's because there's a loss of life. Miscarriage is not criminalized under pro-life laws. anywhere. Like, this is...
It's not considered an abortion.
And consider this, too. We've had pro-life laws on the books for years. We've been at this for decades, where we had our first late-term abortion ban passed in Texas in 1999. And since then, even with the Texas Heartbeat Act this year, have you heard of a single woman getting criminalized for having a miscarriage? No. These are all dystopian fear-mongering because they're trying to take the extreme, take the tragic loss of a miscarriage and misapply it to an elective abortion where a woman seeks out someone to kill her preborn child. And we don't believe in criminalizing that woman either. We want to focus on that abortionist because he's the one that's intentionally taking that life. Miscarriage is not the intentional taking of human life. Ectopic pregnancy is not the intentional taking of human life. You have to ask with these procedures, what is the intent? What is the exact action that's being done?
Yeah. So again, miscarriage is another aspect where in Texas law specifically says an elective abortion is not a miscarriage. It's not a pregnancy termination, is not the result of a spontaneous abortion. Elective abortion, not the result of a spontaneous abortion, because we do recognize that is what is called in the medical literature when you have a miscarriage. And this weekend, one of the unexpected feedbacks I've been getting is from pro-life women who have suffered the tragedy of miscarriage, and they're saying, they've been asking us, could we try to change how the medical field terms miscarriage because they hate seeing that phrase.
They don't like the phrase spontaneous abortion.
Correct. Yeah. And through the last 40 years, the word abortion might have started out in having a very concrete meaning in medical terminology, but it's gone so far from that. And so, that's been a very interesting development conversation I've been having the last few days. And the second, about your point, Kim, that these miscarriage, ectopic pregnancies, for years have not been under any abortion restrictions, right? And I've had that conversation over and over this weekend, is when I show people the language that, okay, no, miscarriage, ectopic pregnancies, these are not considered abortions. And they're like, well, how are doctors going to know that? And I said, well, okay, this is not new language. So I was like trying to impart, this has been what the definition of elective abortion has been in Texas.
This might be new to you. This is not new to any
because they're doctors.
Right.
Right. I mean, if we walk through what it is like for someone who has a miscarriage too, it can depend on how far along they were in their pregnancy. But if it's really early on, they might pass the baby naturally, and then they would go into the hospital for care, and they might need a D&C, but the baby is already passed on, so it is not going to kill the baby.
Right.
And then another thing, if the baby is further along in the pregnancy, they might induce labor. And I have a friend who actually had this happen. Her baby, she was 16 weeks pregnant, and they went in for a normal checkup, and there was no heartbeat. And it was awful. And so they scheduled an induction, and she gave birth, and her baby was dead. And they had a funeral for that baby, and they got to hold their baby and grieve over the baby. And that's the right thing to do, instead of having a D&C abortion procedure to remove the baby, because they literally tear the child limb from limb, and that is not honoring the dead. And it's also just horrible for the parents. A lot of pro-choicers say the opposite. They say that it would be harder to give birth to a dead baby. It's hard no matter what, for sure. It's hard no matter what. But I can't even fathom how someone would say it's better to have an abortion so that they don't have to see their baby. They don't have to see their baby who's dead, because it's like you literally tear them limb from limb and crush their skull. It's like, give birth and allow your body to grieve in this super normal process, and have a funeral and honor this child and come together as a community. Like, that is the way it should be.
But either one of those scenarios is not an abortion.
Exactly. Neither of them is an abortion. And yet people are posting this stupid graphic on TikTok going around viral saying like, miscarriage care is abortion, and care for a septic uterus is abortion. I'm like, well, septic uterus, it's an infection. How is an abortion going to help you? You need antibiotics. Like,
Yeah.
What? And people just say the craziest thing and they have no clue what they're talking about.
Where are those fact checkers?
Right.
They were supposed to be
They're not
Put
fixing
that label
this
on
stuff.
there.
No. So now let's talk about life of the mother.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about life of the mother. So we've got a situation. Life of the mother's threatened. We need to do something quickly because it's an emergency.
Preeclampsia, high blood pressure. She's going to die in 20 minutes or have a stroke. Or both.
Yeah.
You don't do an elective abortion at that instance, but especially like a late-term abortion. But in Texas law, whenever the life of the mother is physically threatened, we have a very tight definition that says if this is a medical emergency, if she actually does need an abortion to save her life, that is permissible. And even Mississippi's law, right, had a medical exception for life of the mother. And those are very rare circumstances. They're very tragic circumstances. And if that is necessary, then that is legally permissible. But we have to look at the necessity too of why are most abortions happening, and it's not for those reasons.
The weirdest part.
Well, I'm going to go back. I mean, that you're right. So that the laws do have life of the mother exceptions if the woman's life is in danger by the pregnancy, by being pregnant, by the act or the presence of the baby being pregnant. But again, we hear from OB-GYNs, high risk OB-GYNs all the time that actually in those situations, a traditional abortion that you would think of that is being offered at Planned Parenthood or Whole Woman's Health, that's not what they do.
Yeah, it takes 2 days to have a late-term abortion because you have to prepare the cervix and widen it, and then they usually give a drug to stop the child's heart. There's different options for that, like saline solution or various other injections that they would inject the child's heart to stop it. They wait for the heart to stop, and then they induce labor.
And that would be a late-term abortion.
Hours and hours and hours. A woman who has preeclampsia and is in danger of an imminent stroke has 20 minutes. It takes 7 minutes to do an emergency C-section.
Correct. So
an
that's
abortion
what
doesn't
happens.
make sense.
Right. Again, they're mistaking pregnancy. All pregnancy outcomes are either an elective abortion that you hear about protesting outside capitals and everyone crazy in New York, or the birth of a live, healthy baby. And those are not the only 2 options for pregnancy outcomes. And, like you said, that the answer to when a woman's life is really in danger is going to be early induction or a C-section. Yeah. Like that you're not doing a traditional elective abortion.
I heard from an amazing man named Dr. John Bruchowski. He's a former abortionist, and he runs PROLIFE clinic up in Pennsylvania now, I believe. And he goes around the nation speaking about he used to be an abortionist. He killed so many children, and then he had a major conversion. And now he's a PROLIFE doctor and is doing everything he can to redeem himself and all the damage that he's done. And he talks about care and for women in these extremely difficult pregnancies, and how just if you could just sum it up in one catchphrase, just remember this: get the baby out. Abortion is not the answer. Get the baby out.
I want to talk about that for a second with you, because why get the baby out? Why is that?
It could be so many things. I mean, think about placenta previa.
Right.
Placenta
but it's
previa.
because it is something that is going on with the baby and the pregnancy itself that is exasperating mom's condition. So that's why, yes, the baby may be too preterm to survive or have a low chance of surviving. Yeah. But the reason why they say get the baby out is because it is something going on with the pregnancy that is causing the mom harm. And so, but the answers to that is not, like you said, an elective abortion. And it's these other ways of trying to deliver the child as quickly as possible. Yeah.
It could be that, placenta previa is when the placenta forms over the cervix. So if she were to give birth, the placenta would come out first, which would kill the baby. And it's also it can cause a ton of risks for mom because she could bleed out, and it's just really dangerous. So they get the baby out. Get the baby out at, early on, maybe like 30 weeks, God willing, a little bit later. But you can't wait.
Yeah. But again, there are medical responses to these situations that do not involve elective abortions. And that is what happens in real life when you're faced with these. People just don't understand that. And they're crying that, that people are going to be hauled to jail for miscarriages and women are going to die.
Yeah. And the reason behind this,
I'm rolling my eyes.
Yes. The reason behind this is that they can't defend elective abortion on its face. They can't say that the 99% of cases where women have abortions out of convenience they can't justify that. They have to turn to the 1%. They have to turn to those scare tactics in order to justify all abortions. Make them justify what they're actually defending. Any abortion for any reason at any term in pregnancy, no matter what, and in some cases paid for by tax dollars.
Yeah.
That's their position. And there's a lot of groups that actually have announced, like, yes, we are pro-abortion. We're not pro-choice. We're pro-abortion. And I got to give them kudos for that because we've been saying that for years. Now, finally, they've admitted it themselves. So if the person you're talking to is sincere in their beliefs, ask them if they would agree with banning the 99% of abortions out of convenience where the mother's life is not physically threatened, because that's what laws like Texas have. And so if they agree with that, then good, they're pro-life, they're on our side. But if they don't, they're exploiting these tragic circumstances and using these false fear-mongering tactics to try to justify their extreme position.
Yeah.
I was not arguing with someone. I was just providing facts.
Okay.
On Facebook today about this whole miscarriage and ectopic pregnancies. And so I get involved in the comments of someone else's post, and a post where in the health and safety code in Texas. And I said, we also actually have a great article on our website, why miscarriage is not an abortion in Texas, at TexasRightsLife.com. So I encourage you to check that out. Share that with your friends.
We'll put it in the comments.
It's been reviewed by OB-GYNs. Okay, we got this. We know.
We know doctors.
But anyways, I showed this information to this woman who was, saying, oh, miscarriage and ectopic pregnancies. And so when I showed that was incorrect, her next response was, well, when are you people going to you're going to be going after gay marriage and what about gun control? I was like, never mind. We are not here to talk about women right now.
Her feelings do not care about your facts.
Right. But again, they're pointing to these other issues because they refuse to defend abortion itself. If you support abortion, defend abortion itself. Do not point to these other issues.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
Drop.
I dare you.
I think that's the high note we should.
I think so. I think that's our out, guys. Well, on that note, you have now been informed. You know the facts. So share them with your friends and family in a graceful and polite manner as best you can. These days, people don't want to have conversation. They want to scream at each other. Being offended has turned into a national pastime. So do the best you can to avoid that. But if they're willing to engage in conversation, you have information. So I'm finding that when they start out engaging in conversation and then it declines. There's some hurt there that maybe they don't want to talk about. Need some prayer, guys. We're realizing just how much prayer we need for our culture these days. So pray for our culture. Pray for some Supreme Court justices. And get out there, change some hearts and minds, pro-life family, and we'll see you next week.